Well, I'm shaking off my notebook and seeing what falls out after a very busy few weeks. We're holding it down in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm Al Dominick, one of your hosts, along with my man Steve Williams.
Al, how you liking Scottsdale summer? Isn't it beautiful?
Balmy.
Balmy.
Relaxing.
It's a dry heat.
UV index of 11. Dust storms, rain showers, monsoons, 119-degree temperatures.
Chamber of Commerce weather.
Exactly why we're getting together in the studio today to talk about what's happening in the world of banking. You know, we're in the throes of summer strategic planning sessions. We're gearing up for fall board meetings and retreats. Mm-hmm. So, you know, while we think about pulling the sweaters out and cooler days ahead, we've got some hot stuff that we need to talk about right now. We also need to update and refresh our Spotify playlist that, you know, anchors all of our conversations. So I have 5 great bands that we're going to use to, you know, get our conversation going.
Let's break it down.
I'm going to surprise you because you've only seen me for about 20 seconds. We're going to go Oasis. We're going Rolling Stones. We're going Led Zeppelin, The Offspring, and Green Day.
All right.
So sorry, no Taylor Swift
I love
this
them
time.
all. I love them all.
All right, so think about like Steve and I basically like being the Gallagher brothers of Oasis. You know, we're being reunited.
Do we fight a lot?
Well, we do fight, but we also have fans that I think want us to come back together and do some cool stuff.
All right.
So if we're going to have a do you know what I mean moment, I think we got to talk about this not being the summer to paint a rosy picture. And I say that because, you know, if I'm sitting in the role of a board member, I want to get the real honest truth as to what's my long-term future, what's the viability of the business model that we've been using.
Right.
And if you've been like me and you've been traveling a bunch, you've probably read some interesting things. One that really jumped out to me was a piece authored by Matt Harris of Bain Capital Ventures. He talks about a, quote, fog of war, which is approaching the fintech space, but by extension, the entire financial world. So I just took a moment, jotted down a quote, want to see your take.
It's a quote that's been around a lot in my boardroom, so go ahead and read the whole thing because it was one of those quotes of the year, I think.
It's a quote of the year and could be in the running for a Gonzo Banker Award.
Probably so.
So Matt says, quote, I think we may finally be coming to the end of the American banking system with its 8,000 banks. At the end, the death rattle of that odd system could produce quarters and years of contracting credit for companies and projects of all types and have this really massive, in the near and medium term, tumultuous impact on everyone. That's pretty scary.
Very inspiring. Boo, boo. And I think 8,000, he means banks and credit unions because there's about 45.
We'll give him liberty of joining the two together.
Here's part of it. Let me throw up a picture real quick. We just had yesterday our 13th rate increase, 13 in a row. Fed funds well up 5.25, 5.5. This is what bankers have had to deal with, something historic. And you can see by this EKG of the last 15 years or so, this is what bankers have to deal with. This is part of their business. But yesterday felt like a moment from Animal House, if you recall. Kevin Bacon saying to Jay Powell, thank you, sir. May I have another? This is what it's felt like. But I think in Matt's case, I view this as something very historic, what's happened. But I think it's another cycle. It's another evolution of the banks. I don't think, and I hope the community banking, regional banking, credit union system isn't going away. I think we would both agree if there's about 9,000 banks and credit unions, end of decade, we're talking 5,000.
Agreed. But, you know, everyone who's listening knows this is an industry marked by consolidation. This is not a new concept. I just think, you know, Matt's take is attention worthy. And it's something that if I'm in the board, I want to talk about because I should be skeptical of a bank's, you know, performance potential. And that's not to say I'm not enthusiastic and opportunistic, but as a board member, I have a responsibility to ask the tough questions.
The difference this time is board members aren't saying, comfort me about capital, comfort me about credit quality. They're saying, with this liquidity crisis we saw, with technology changing, with operational risk, when you can have a Twitter-based bank run, do I have the right business model to create shareholder value in the future? That's the big difference, and that's where Matt's right. Yep. There's an existential moment about business model in banking.
Well, and you and I have shared text messages around margin protection, not necessarily margin expansion being just a theme that we continue to run into. So thinking about the liability side of the balance sheet makes perfect sense right now.
Yeah, but we're in the middle. We're, you know, probably 4-1. People are saying soft landing versus recession. So there's also this kind of moment we're going to talk about where there may be some real hope for how to navigate through this. And next thought would be what, focusing on the long term?
Well, I guess that's the second one. And this is where, you know, Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, John Bonham, and John Paul Jones, who formed Led Zeppelin, would say you got to give a whole lot of love to the future of your business. So you can't get it so sideways with, what we've dealt with since March Madness, this spring. I think you got to think your funding positions, your asset deployments, what you're doing with investors, your employees, but you can't lose sight that just because we're dealing with the moment now, there isn't a responsibility to think further ahead.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm going to hold up one more chart, and this is the KBW Regional Bank Index, and you can see we had that moment with SVB, but it's been crawling back from a low of about 35 in early May now to tipping 49. That's a 40% return in about 75 days, plus a 3.8% dividend. This has been hotter than the FANG stocks in the last 60 days. Now, I know it's recovering from a trough, but I think it gives you that data point. Hey, there's a long term here, and there's a restructuring going to go on in the industry that's going to be healthy.
Yeah, and it's interesting as we think of earnings and what we saw, it seems like bank stock prices, a lot of the bad news has been priced in.
Right.
And so, again, if you're an optimist and you're saying, are there better days ahead? You could say maybe there are.
Yeah.
The data definitely gives you some confidence.
And here's what I think a soft landing means, if there is one. First of all, I think you do scenario analysis for every scenario out there. But for a soft landing, I think what that means is you've got to not pull back so much on lending that you don't take advantage of some of the opportunities for good, well-priced loans to put your balance sheet to work. And that's why we see banks everywhere restructuring their balance sheets, taking some hits here and there. So it's very important, for bankers, you got to price up. You got to get paid for your risk, paid for the fact there's not as much liquidity out there, and put that balance sheet to work now. Everybody has had to tank their cost of funds to get back in the market on liquidity. But now we can balance out, that balance sheet and not lose the opportunity being too risk averse.
Yeah. So as you're saying this, I want to flip it, over from a long-term perspective to the employee retention side. Because we can talk numbers, we can talk, or graphs, but the people that's the secret sauce.
Absolutely.
And so if I'm in a bank and I've been on this roller coaster ride for the last 3-4 years, where it's just been constant reaction to bad news, troubling news, deposit challenges, what can and should people be, communicating more frequently to their employees?
Yeah, good point. I had a CFO lament last week, was really excited about hiring a finance guy until he said, I'm just not really excited about banking because of all the, quote, troubles in the industry. Bad press, obviously a little over salacious. I think it's that whole strategy around talent and workplace, and I do believe regional community credit unions, they're going to be great workplaces in the future if they take a very progressive attitude towards that. I think what's really important is to show your strategic vision and plan, not in glossy terms, but in very definitive priorities and goals to the team right now, and answer the question that's most important: what's in it for me? How is my income going to grow? What's my personal wealth management plan at this bank? And I think good entrepreneurial banks do that well.
Well, I think this ties in with some of the social media lessons that we've learned about communication. You cannot keep your story tightly held. And so that applies to, how do you attract people into your organization? So if somebody says, that's a thorny problem, I don't want to, address it, that's probably not the right person for you. Like, you want folks who are ready to, get in there, roll up their sleeves, do some stuff. This is not a boring industry.
And I hate to say it, but you look at a lot of banks' LinkedIn, and you've got someone posted a press release 75 days ago where a great bank, when you see their social media footprint, you want to give the signal, that looks like a fun place to work. That looks like a very active place. Seems like they're doing a lot. Yeah. And I think that's one thing we don't do well in the industry is show what a great workplace you have to the world through social media. Yeah. And I think, again, just in our travels, we spend time with really interesting bankers who are doing some pretty cool things. What I love is when an organization is growing, in its asset size, but it doesn't want to lose its entrepreneurial spirit. Right. And so they really prioritize how do they keep their identity, even as they do some things that would maybe prohibit somebody from thinking this is going to be anything but just a stodgy old bureaucracy. Yeah. Maybe the most important executive in this next cycle is the head of talent and how they create that talent strategy for the future.
Interesting. Well, so, thinking about talent, thinking about strategy, it's kind of fun to think what's happened over the last 12 months just in terms of conversations about creativity and talent. At this time last year, we probably would have led off this podcast talking about banking as a service, right? And what's going on.
The hot world of fintech and BaaS.
I think BaaS is kind of having its moment, but maybe not in the way that we would have described it a year ago. So if I queued up the music from The Offspring with the kids aren't all right. I think that probably lines up because, from Blue Ridge to Cross River, you can look in the news and find examples of some of these, BaaS providers getting a little sideways with their communication to regulators with, some of the things that they're doing. Not to throw shade on the individual organization, but I do think right now, there's some stuff going on in the BaaS space that's not as sexy, not as cool. Doesn't mean it's going to stop, but I think we also have to acknowledge it.
It's gone from that early shiny object that everybody was saying, should we get into it? And then everybody had liquidity crisis, so most people put that on ice. The active players, I think the lesson is it's early in the innings, right? And this stuff is hard. And the fact is that compliance and risk management and InfoSec and everything else are capabilities you're going to have to deliver tech-driven financial services. And tech companies,
they're not big fans. Even if they say they are, I'd be hard pressed to find anyone who's like, I can't wait to go.
Right. I think it's a signal tech companies aren't immortal and banks aren't dead. They have to work together well, and I think they'll get through this. I think there will be less players in BaaS who are really good at this regulated BaaS environment.
Yeah, and those that can show their partners that they do this right time and again. It's that rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. If they can be deliberate in their activities, and they're communicating in a way that people can appreciate and not be surprised, then I think you've built something. And there's some great BaaS providers out there.
So there's some great tech and great process management that'll mature. We just kind of got out there in the market faster than that maturity. That's my take on it. It will come over time with fewer players.
Well, let me give a little shout out to a BaaS provider up in New York City, and a lesson learned from Revolut and Metropolitan Commercial. Again, just to stick with this, My Own Worst Enemy by The Offspring could be the music that you're listening to because, and I used My Own Worst Enemy for Revolut, not for the bank, because according to the FT, Revolut was erroneously refunding transactions with its own funds when certain transactions were declined. And so this resulted in a $20 million loss in its U.S. subsidiary. And so again, I was reading through this FT article and I thought, interesting how they were doing this. I wonder how they kind of woke up to it. Well, it turns out their partner bank, which is Metropolitan Commercial, had noticed it had less cash than anticipated and was able to flag this as something for Revolut to look at. So I take that as an example of a good, healthy relationship where you can say, hey, there's a little mustard on your face. Let's make sure that's taken care of real quick.
Yeah, and over time, that'll be one of the service promises of a bank like Metro or a Cross River or a Blue Ridge. I also want to bring up a recent story. Apple Savings has probably been the embedded finance story of the year so far. Certainly got a lot of attention as we all look in our Apple wallets and see that offer. Our Chief Research Officer, Ron Shevlin, though, pointed out something very interesting about clients having trouble with slow money movement or clunky money movement, and Apple extending a refund, which I think is great of Apple, and Ron calculating the cost. It's another example of an almost immortal tech company having a bank operational problem. And so embedded finance is coming. It's going to happen. It's going to be much more of kind of the value chain in the future. So I'm not saying poo-poo embedded finance. It's just we have to understand that there's things we can contribute to that activity along the way because, again, tech companies, that's not what they think about all day long. They think about the next great piece of software or the next great app.
Yeah, and Ron's been bringing the fire on,
Yes, he has.
on social media. If you're not seeing what he's writing, check him out on LinkedIn because some of the stuff is getting incredible impressions and engagements. And the comments and conversations that he's sparked, I think those are really fascinating just to participate in. So here's to you, Ron Shevlin.
Here's to you, Ron.
All right, so final topic, we want to basically share what we're paying attention to. So I'm pulling Green Day's basket case out because we've got a basket of things that we find interesting. I mentioned Matt Harris to kick things off, Matt with Bain Capital Ventures. BCV also had a really fascinating field guide around artificial intelligence. And I think if you have an opportunity to look at that, to understand the difference between traditional AI, which has been around for some time, generative AI, which is all the buzz with ChatGPT, this is a real interesting exploration of where there's very practical applications of certain ideas and concepts. And so when you think about where investors are putting money, I always think that's a really interesting canary in the coal mine to pay attention to. Because they see something that we may not be paying attention to at the moment. But if they're going to throw some cash in, they think there's a return, and that return is probably 10x what
Right.
they stake it to.
Yeah.
So that's
And
one thing I've been looking at.
I think real quick on AI, because I'm hearing a lot about this in my strategic planning meetings, that the call to action right now for bankers is let's inventory the potential use cases for AI. Everybody's asking Cornerstone for that. We've got our summer interns working on that, doing deep research. But what are the use cases and who are the players? So the use cases for alternative credit or fraud detection or marketing, that's one big thing that we really see out there right now. And the other thing I thought, McKinsey recently pointed out last week, the future of using AI rests with middle management. And I believe that every one of my middle management leaders needs to be in that continuous learning loop right now. And most have very little, other than playing with ChatGPT, very little practical use yet. That needs to change very quickly in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and we're going to be surfacing different ideas as quick as we can. So
Around
you're not
those use cases.
so you're not wasting your time, because you can't
Right.
go down rabbit holes if you're not careful.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one thing that we're paying attention to. Another one, you talked about interest rates.
Yeah.
Going up the same day the rate increase was announced, I think coincided with two interesting bank transactions.
Yeah.
That hit the news wire. I mean, we haven't talked bank M&A in how long?
We were saying it's coming, and it even came maybe a few months sooner than I thought. So it's good to see, and I think this is indicative of people seeing value, but value that needs to be restructured right now to right the ship for the next chapter of banking.
Yep.
So exciting, the two deals.
So we liked Atlantic Union and American National and Virginia coming together. Thought that was pretty cool. And then we see PacWest and Bank of California also being announced. And that the PacWest Bank of California deal, it kind of felt like it had to happen. But there's great opportunities there. I mean, that'll become a $36-37 billion institution in the state of California that could really do some meaningful work.
Right.
For the communities that it serves.
Well, and I got to give credit to the fact that remember PacWest was on a lifeline in early May, and we kind of said don't panic and shut these banks down. And I think this is a market solution. What's occurred? You had PacWest saying we may not have the same premium we had a few months ago, but we need to preserve shareholder value. You saw a merger that creates really a balance sheet restructure. Yep. This is all about a balance sheet restructure. And the gravy is they have a great local franchise they can try to build. And then we talked about this. The fact $400 million of private equity is coming in means maybe a canary signal that there's value in this current pricing.
Yeah.
And so I think that maybe sets the floor for restructures and starts to get people thinking about these deals where we come together, we restructure our balance sheet to shore up liquidity. Now, one thing I want to point out, though, even post-deal, PacWest, Bank of California, 80% uninsured. Now, what does that mean? That doesn't mean there's going to be another run. What it means is you have to show the strength to the marketplace much more than we're FDIC insured. Business customers will underwrite their bank from now on. You've got to make your underwriting package very impressive. I think that's a huge thing for all our commercial-focused business banks out there. You are being underwritten by your customers every week now. Be ready for that.
Be ready. That's maybe our big takeaway. Is just be ready. We've got, again, a lot of things hitting our desks. We just wanted to take a few minutes to share what we think is really interesting. Again, we're going to be pulling some new guests into the studio in the weeks to come. But both Steve Williams and I just want to say thanks for getting plugged in with Cornerstone Advisors.
Thanks. Let's go outside and enjoy the Arizona heat.
Let's go get a suntan.
Thank you, guys.